You were never really married to my son," Diana shouted, waving some papers in my face. "These documents prove it. You lied and tricked him." Her face showed victory as she stood in my living room, holding what looked like legal papers. Behind her, my husband, Michael, looked nervous, avoiding my eyes. His new girlfriend, Ashley, stood nearby, smirking. I stayed calm, though my heart was racing. I was 32 and had spent 8 years with Michael, thinking we had a real marriage. Now his mother was saying it was all fake. She had never liked me and had always tried to break us up. "The courthouse has no record of your marriage," Diana continued with a smug look. "I had a lawyer check. That means you have no right to this house or anything else. Pack your bags and leave." I turned to Michael, hoping he would defend me, remind his mother of our wedding. But he said nothing. He just stood there silent. Meanwhile, Ashley was already eyeing the house as if it were hers. "Nothing to say," Diana taunted. "You finally realize your little scam is over. Michael needs someone from a good family, not some nobody he met in a coffee shop." I walked over to a small desk in the corner, the only thing I had from my grandmother. Diana always hated it, saying it didn't belong in her son's fancy house. As she kept talking, I opened a hidden drawer and pulled out an old envelope. My hands were shaking, but I held it tight. "You never belonged here," Diana went on. "I knew it from the start. No family, no background. Just a pretty face that fooled my son." I took out an old birth certificate, yellowed with age, and looked at Diana. "Actually," I said, "you might want to read this." Diana grabbed the paper, still looking confident, but as she read, her face went pale. She stepped back, holding onto the sofa for support. This isn't real," she whispered. "Oh, it's real," I said. "My grandmother found it. She was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in 1962, the night you gave birth." Michael stepped closer, worried. "Mom, what's going on?" Diana fell onto the sofa, the paper shaking in her hands. The confidence was gone. "My grandmother never forgot that night," I continued. "She helped deliver twins, a boy and a girl. But the records only showed one baby. She always wondered why." The room was silent. Even Ashley stopped smirking. I did some research. Back then, wealthy families sometimes gave away one twin to avoid shame. The records would say only one baby was born to protect their reputation. "Stop," Diana whispered, but I kept going. "The baby girl was adopted by a family in Ohio. She grew up and had a daughter. That daughter met a man named Michael, never knowing they were cousins." Michael's face turned pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I looked straight at Diana, "that you and my mother are twins, which makes Michael and me first cousins, and our marriage illegal." The birth certificate fell from Diana's hands. Ashley stepped away from Michael like he was contagious. Her dream of marrying into his family had just fallen apart. Diana, who had spent years looking down on me, had just learned the truth. Her family and mine were the same. Michael swallowed hard. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to see why you pulled away from me. Long enough to know the truth had to come out." I picked up the birth certificate and put it back in the envelope. Inside were more documents, adoption papers, hospital records, my grandmother's notes. "You're right, Diana," I said softly. "Michael and I were never legally married, but not for the reason you thought." The days after my revelation were filled with chaos. Diana ran out of the house that night, leaving behind the courthouse papers she had been so proud of. Michael locked himself in his home office, while Ashley quietly disappeared, realizing her dream of becoming Mrs. Harrison had vanished. I stayed in the guest room, sorting through the documents my grandmother had left me. They told a story that had been hidden for 60 years, hospital records, adoption papers, and the most shocking of all, the letters. "Mom?" Michael's voice startled me. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, looking lost. "We need to talk about what happens now." I held the letters in my lap, letters between my grandmother and the adoption agency showing how Diana had begged to keep her pregnancy a secret. "There's nothing to talk about. Our marriage was never real. You're free to be with Ashley or whoever your mother chooses for you." He winced. "That's not fair. I didn't know any of this." "But you were ready to throw me out just because your mother said so," I reminded him. "You stood there while she called me a gold digger and a fraud." Before he could reply, his phone buzzed. Diana's name popped up on his screen. He put it on speaker. Michael, darling, Diana's voice was calm, but I could hear the tension. I've spoken to our lawyer. We can handle this quietly. No one has to know about this mess. I laughed bitterly, still trying to hide the truth, Diana, just like you did 60 years ago. She lost her composure. You had no right to dig up the past. This affects our whole family's reputation. I'm thinking about family, I shot back. My mother spent her whole life wondering why she was abandoned, never knowing she had a twin brother living in luxury just a few states away. Michael sat heavily on the bed. Have you told her? I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted to give you and Diana a chance to do the right thing first. Diana's voice turned sharp. The right thing would be to destroy those documents and forget this ever happened. We'll arrange a quiet divorce, say it was irreconcilable differences. Everything can go back to normal. Normal? I stood up, anger boiling inside me. Like separating twins at birth? Like treating your own niece like she was beneath you? Like pushing your son to leave his wife for a younger woman? Silence. I've already copied all the documents, I continued. Everything is digitized and stored safely. You can't hide this again, Diana. Her voice was weak now. What do you want? I want you to tell my mother the truth. She deserves to know where she came from. She deserves to meet her brother. And maybe then we can start healing this family. Michael reached for my hand, but I pulled away. His touch, once comforting, now felt wrong. I need time, Diana whispered. Time to figure out how to do this. You have 3 days, I said firmly. After that, I tell my mother everything. I ended the call, ignoring Diana's protests. Michael sat there, staring at the scattered papers. I'm so sorry, he finally said, for not standing up to her. For letting Ashley, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. It doesn't matter now, I said, gathering the documents. Our marriage was never real. We're cousins, Michael. First cousins. Everything we thought we had was built on a lie. Not everything, he whispered. Our feelings were real. Our life together. It was a house of cards. I cut him off. And your mother just knocked it down. I grabbed the envelope of documents. I'm staying with my sister for a few days. When I come back, I expect you to be gone. We need to end this cleanly, before anyone else gets hurt. As I packed my bag, I felt Michael watching me. We had spent 8 years building a life together, celebrating birthdays, holidays, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee. But now, every moment was tainted by the truth. Diana had wanted to push me out of her family. Instead, she had proven that I was part of it all along, just not in the way any of us had expected. 3 days passed like molasses. I stayed at my sister Emma's apartment, trying to process everything while fielding concerned calls from friends and family. I hadn't told my mother yet. That revelation deserved its own time and space. On the morning of the 3rd day, Diana called. I'll do it, she said, her voice rough as if she hadn't slept. I'll tell her everything. But I want to do it in person. We arranged to meet at my grandmother's old house, now my mother's home. It seemed fitting. The place where I first discovered the truth would be where the final secrets were revealed. When I arrived, my mother was in the garden, tending to her roses. She looked up as I approached, her smile faltering when she saw Diana behind me. Mom, I said softly, there's something you need to know. What followed was 2 hours of tears, anger, and long-buried truths. Diana, stripped of her usual arrogance, told the story of a scared 19-year-old girl from a prominent family, forced to give up one of her twins to avoid scandal. My mother listened in stunned silence as her origin story was finally revealed. I thought about you every day, Diana whispered, reaching for my mother's hand. Every birthday, every Christmas, I wondered where you were, if you were happy. You could have found me, my mother replied, her voice trembling. You've known who I was since Michael started dating my daughter. 8 years, Diana. 8 years you've looked me in the eye at family gatherings, knowing I was your sister. I was a coward, Diana admitted. The longer I waited, the harder it became. And then when Michael and Olivia married, she trailed off, shame coloring her features. You tried to drive me away. I finished for her. Because every time you saw me with Michael, it reminded you of what you've done. Diana nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought if I could just separate you two, the guilt would stop. But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. My mother stood up, pacing the familiar garden path. I need time to process this. My whole life. Everything I thought I knew about myself. Take all the time you need, Diana said quietly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Either of you. As Diana left, my mother and I sat in the garden, holding each other and crying for all the years lost, all the pain caused by secrets and shame. 2 months later, life had settled into a new normal. Michael and I filed for an annulment, citing our previously unknown blood relationship. He moved to Seattle for a fresh start, while I stayed in our old house. Diana signed it over to me as part of her attempt at making amends. My mother and Diana began the slow process of building a relationship. They started with weekly coffee meetings, sharing stories and photographs, piecing together their separate lives. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but slowly, surely they began to heal. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Diana's car pulled into my driveway. She walked up hesitantly, carrying a small box. These belong to you, she said, placing it beside me. Inside were photo albums, baby pictures of my mother that Diana had kept hidden all these years. I thought maybe you could share them with her, make copies, start filling in the blanks. I nodded, touched by the gesture. Thank you. She turned to leave, then paused. Olivia? I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I truly am sorry. Not just for the recent past, but for all of it. You and Michael, you deserve better. We all did, I replied softly. But maybe now we can build something better. Something honest. As I watched her drive away, I opened one of the albums. A photo slipped out, twin baby girls, just hours old, sleeping peacefully side by side. On the back, in faded ink, were their names and a simple message, my beautiful daughters. May you find each other someday. Sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes it destroys the life you thought you had. But sometimes, like a forest after a fire, what grows back is stronger, healthier, and more beautiful than what was there before. Diana, my mother, and I were learning this together, one day at a time. Our family tree had been violently shaken, but its roots ran deeper than any of us had known. And from those roots, something new and unexpected was beginning to grow.